Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Fiction. My name is Melanie. I'm the Director of Public Programming here, and I'm going to introduce you to our co-presenters first. Yaddo is our co-presenter for this event, and so I want to welcome David Falk.
Hello. So I'm David Falk. I'm Yaddo's Director of Philanthropy. Thank you, Melanie, and thank you everyone for the Center for Fiction. Thank you everyone for coming. Thrilled to be here in your stunningly beautiful new place. We've just finished a 3-year restoration project, a massive restoration of our studios. So we know what it's like to focus on building 20th century studios for writers and artists. So, show of hands, can I ask who here is familiar with Yaddo? That's pretty great. I was afraid it was going to be my wife and Susan. So we are the country's oldest artist residency. Started in 1900. I should probably look at my notes, shouldn't I? I'm like a 53-year-old millennial here. So we're about 280 miles north of here on 400 wooded acres in Saratoga Springs. Our mission is super simple. It's to give artists time and space to focus on their work. It's to nurture the creative process by giving the ability to work without interruption in a collaborative space. So who has called Yaddo home? Writers from Langston Hughes and James Baldwin to Ta-Nehisi Coates and Tahari Jones, from Carson McCullers and Dorothy Parker to Lauren Groff and Elizabeth Strout and Jennifer Egan, from Truman Capote to David Sedaris, composers Leonard Bernstein and Aaron Copland, painters Milton Avery and Philip Guston, filmmakers Noah Baumbach, Miranda July, Jason Reitman. So since opening our doors, we've hosted 7,500 artists, and they've come to live and work. Among those artists have been the recipients of 79 Pulitzer Prizes, 69 National Book Awards, more than 500 MacArthur Fellowships, Guggenheim Fellowships, 50 MacArthur, 6 Academy Awards, and a Nobel. So we're delighted to kick off these jointly presented evenings to celebrate creative collaboration. And this is the intersections and surprises that occur across genres. And this is something that happens every night at Yaddo around the dinner table, now that it's not so wide apart. So thank you all for coming tonight. Special thanks to our brilliant artists tonight, Heidi Kumao and Susan Steinberg. Thank you.
So just really briefly, I want to ask how many people are visiting the Center for Fiction for the first time this evening? Okay, awesome. So this is our public floor. We also have a second floor that has a terrace and a reading room. And if you become a member, you can use that room to read quietly in elegance. So I encourage you to go check it out. I always like to say it's the nicest living room that none of us will ever have in New York City. And it's yours for the taking when you become a member. We are the only nonprofit in the United States that focuses on the craft and enjoyment of fiction. And that's, thank you. It's an interesting time in American history for a new place like this to open. And so we're really happy that this good thing is happening in the world, and we're happy that you found us and that you joined us, and we hope you come back. And I think we should move along with our program. So to start us off tonight, Heidi's going to do her presentation, and then Susan's going to join her on stage. So let's please welcome Heidi Kumao to the stage.
Hello. All right. So I have first want to thank Yaddo and Center for Fiction and Susan Steinberg for inviting me to have this conversation. Today I'm just going to show you some selections of some of the work that I've done that sort of relates to some of the themes in Susan's recent novel, Machine. So I've loosely grouped the work into two basic categories. So the first one I'll call Body as Machine. And I use art basically to translate an emotional or psychological state into an experience for the viewer. I'm interested in how a physical gesture, such as stomping, behavior, and how it reflects a specific emotional state. So I try to make connections between like the physical external gesture and the internal emotions. And so artistically, I do this by creating mechanical robotic sculptures and animations, stop motion, as well as other types. And when I'm thinking about how to represent a body using machine or technology, I focus on really small gestures and small acts and small moments, and kind of focus on figuring out a way to make them emotive. So things like stomping or tapping or cleaning or gardening or flying a kite, which can seem really, really small, but when examined in a larger context, take on a different meaning. So I use these really small episodes to, as a way to as a portal to talk about larger issues. So in this case, gender, girlhood, childhood, behavior, misbehavior. And so when you are an artist and you're working with technology or mechanical things, you end up stepping into a world that's very gendered, blatantly gendered, right? When I was thinking about making these girls' legs, that one's called Protest, and the other one's called Resist. This is pre the current administration. I was thinking about this context. At the time, I had a fellowship at Carnegie Mellon, and I was sort of surrounded with things like this. The other part of the context that people expect, the things that they expect from a machine, right? That it will do a job for you, like go places that you can't go, or do things that you can't do, and do it better for you. I mean, I know these are sort of obvious, but and then another thing that people expect out of machines is that they expect them to be helpful, and helpful often translates as female. And if you think Siri, Alexa, or here, Moxie, Pearl, and Amy, robotic assistants now are just part of our daily life, and it's always just struck me as like interesting how the assumption is that it's always going to be a female. So with that in mind, I made a project I called Misbehaving, and it was very much kind of in contrast to all of those expectations. And so, I created these kind of, they're robotic looking, but they're not autonomous. But they are female, first of all, after being surrounded by everything, Game Boy, Walkman, Discman, whatever. They disobey, they perform unconventional acts, they misbehave. They have no function, they serve no purpose other than to perform emotion. So one set of legs was designed to stand on top of a table, which of course you're not supposed to do. And the table, I've done it several times. I've made her about 7 times. And she's supposed to stand on a glass-topped table so that it's even more kind of, there's a little more risk involved. Or and my idea was like, wow, if she really stomps, she could break the glass. This particular installation, I didn't have glass on the table. But the other problem is, if I really program the actions to be as severe as I'd like them to be, she could potentially rip herself off the wall. So there's kind of a balance between making her as aggressive as I want her to be, and making it possible to be sustained over a 6-month exhibition. So sometimes people think she's dancing, and that's always a little bit interesting. But there's different zones, and I've programmed her behavior to do sort of different things depending on where the viewer is standing. But what I found so interesting, this is interesting just with using machines as a kind of interface, is that people think they're controlling her, but it's totally the opposite. They're totally they're mimicking her, and it was a really interesting surprise to me. And then the other pair is kind of squirms on the floor and kind of sort of pushing the viewer away or shivering in a kind of nervous way. And I don't know, sort of borderline sexual. And so the only thing that indicates that it's female, I suppose, is the shoes. But that's all you really need for like the sexuality and the gender and the whole assumption to kind of be evident to people. Sometimes there would just be these really incredible moments of exact mirroring. Okay. So another way I think about using machines is thinking about them as performing labor, but that labor ends up being very gendered. And so in a way, a machine is performing, but it's performing a task, but it's also performing femininity in a way. And so this is just a totally different body of work that I made that I called Cinema Machines. There's a zoetrope inside an object, and sort of like the object has a voice that projects a loop of photographs. So it's a single gesture just repeated over and over. So in this case, there's like a little cabinet that's projecting down into a box. You'll see inside. So there's just a woman sweeping, trying to clean this one little spot with some torn letters and other kinds of domestic papers in there. So there's a kind of contrast between sort of the machine as this kind of efficient, mechanical, endlessly operating thing, but then paired with the sort of absurdity and pointlessness of the task. And so I always thought it was kind of like a serious piece, but then some people look in the box and start laughing. So it's always interesting response people have. Another example of a cinema machine is a piece I call Adore, and it's a cinema machine where the mechanism is projecting a loop of a woman curtsying, like she's on stage, or she's sort of saying thank you or you're welcome. I thought it's a performance of I don't know, giving the viewer what they want. But I always thought it was kind of interesting because it's almost like the viewer is projecting what they want. So it's a kind of interesting duality between the what's being performed and what the viewer is projecting onto that. But again, the sort of performance of gender. And so other things that I've made that sort of perform some kind of labor. Sometimes I've made these little robotic, like this one is only like this tall, I don't know, characters that I don't have to machine and make work. And so I can just animate it without actually attaching motors. And that sort of gives me an idea of like what I could do. And so then I took that one. I thought, oh, I wonder what it would be like if I made it into a sculpture. So I remade it and then mechanized it. So there's motors and stuff in the box underneath. And so basically, she's kind of cleaning her own prison. Kind of was what I was thinking about. So the bell jar has condensation inside, and it's kind of murky and hard to see her, but the one little spot where she's cleaning is a little bit clearer. So it's kind of my beta version of my scrubber. And other kinds of feminine performances, trying to fit into clothes that don't fit you. This was actually kind of an accident. Like, I made this dress 4 times, and every single time it didn't fit. So then I thought, well, maybe that's a stupid animation. So, or just performing an escape. And then the second group is, I was thinking about like reimagining the female body, and so one incident that made me have to do this was this is maybe the chapter on reimagining the failed body. I broke my back a few years ago in a sledding accident. As you can see, I went sledding. And I had to wear this brace for 3 months. And I realized early on that I could write and draw on this plastic thing. And so I started to enter. It was a very isolating experience to be laying on your couch for 3 months and staring at the ceiling. And so it was really just to entertain myself that I started doing these, basically making alternative versions of myself, or just being able to take on another identity, make fun of the body that I had, and critique the female body, because I felt like it wasn't really mine, so it kind of gave me more license to do kooky things with it. That really was all the drugs that I was on. And so this experience of lying on the couch and staring at the ceiling while on a lot of painkillers was really isolating. In a way, this is kind of the metaphor for the whole experience. But it also gave me this feeling of being like under a frozen lake, or under a frozen body of water. And so that became like that point of view, or that perspective of looking up to frozenness, became kind of the seed for like beginning a film. And so I'm going to play the film that I made that sort of does the trauma and then goes out of the trauma. So it's like a 4-minute short experimental piece about breaking my back. But you should know that I broke my back by going over a jump that I didn't see and landing. And so that act of going up and coming down very hard is something that's an integral part of the film. So that perspective and the perspective of looking up from below is also a key part of the film. So I'll play that. Let's see. Go. So that movie, one of my main goals for the movie, because I make a lot of objects that I feel like when you're a viewer, you get this sort of physical experience with it. When I was making this movie, it was kind of, I was missing that physicality, and so it was really important to me to create a piece that you would feel. And so that sort of dropping in that constant kind of trauma of the drop was a real key component for me in making that. So another way, in like I think about reimagining the body, is in making using technology to sort of enhance your body.
You know, sometimes people are looking at your breasts anyway. So why not take advantage of this common occurrence? Accentuate what is there already with the new audio-activated bra. Meant to accentuate by activating 90 LEDs per breast. Notice the small, obscure microphone which catches sound, and the handy dial for sensitivity. Less or more lights for you.
So this, yeah, it's a fairly uncomfortable thing to wear, like most women's fashion. Um, but it's a pretty fun piece. It's just using a circuit like the same chip that is for BU meters, like in a stereo, right? So it just like the more noise, the more lights work. And so once I made the bra, I thought, oh, maybe I'll go big. And so I went kind of cuckoo crazy. Actually, I made this at Yaddo, so it's funny. I decided, well, I'll be a walking VU meter. I'll put on a dress. And so again, it's very heavy and very uncomfortable because it's a lot of soldering. And so I kind of just wanted to go a little over the top. I live in Ann Arbor. Right, so that's the enhanced body. A lot of LEDs, a heavy purse. And then I'll just end with a couple fun pieces where I was sort of thinking about imagining the body as a kind of receptacle and keeper of emotions and information. So here's I don't know. These are all parts of the project I'm working on now. So she's watching TV. I think she's going to watch the Christine Blasey Ford hearing. So that's my last reimagined body. So thank you for your attention. Thank you. All right. Thank you.
Microphones as a heads up for when it's time to go to the Q&A. Okay. So they're going to bring the chairs on now, right? Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Should I just go? Okay. Hi. It's much less scary sitting there than it is up here. So yeah. Thank you so much, Heidi.
That was fun.
When I was invited to come here to give this reading, I was asked to invite an artist to join me, and Heidi was the first person I thought of, and I thought, yeah, of course. Our work has a lot of overlap, actually. I think that I feel like all of your images, I feel like every single one of those women, like all the time. And I thought any one of those would relate to any one section in this book. But I chose to read, there may or may not be someone here who's gone to all my readings in New York. And I want to read something I haven't read here, though I'm not sure if I did or not. But I think we can find overlap in almost anything. So thank you, Yaddo, for co-sponsoring this event. Heidi and I met there in 2001, pre-9/11, so long ago, and have since overlapped in other places. And so anyway, it's in a very important place to me. It was the first place I ever went like it, and I've gone back since and really love it. So I'm happy to be here for Yaddo. And thank you to the Center for Fiction for inviting me. I feel like I'm always having to defend myself as a fiction writer. That people will say that my work is poetry, which it's not. I've never written poetry. I tried once, and my teacher at the time was like, please don't do that. Just try stories. And then some people think it's nonfiction, and it's not. So it's just fiction, and that's okay. It's all right. Go fiction. So this is a novel that I thought was a short story collection, but it's not. And I am going to read from a section. Did I forget to say anything? No? I'm just going to do this. It's going to be very short. And the last thing I wanted to do really was follow Heidi.
You can turn my
by the
image
way,
thing off.
Your work looks amazing that big.
know,
I've
nice.
only ever seen it on a small screen. It's really, really amazing. And then we have, oh no, did I leave?
Where's your hat?
It's right there. I have a hat with questions that we're going to ask each other. We're going to just pull them out of the hat. So we wrote them, but but we don't know what order. Okay. And there's also surprises in there, some drawings we did as well. So this section is called Machines, and my book is also called Machine. So that's one overlap. So machines. If I never learned the earth was spinning, that there was no bottom and there was no top, that light from stars I could see left years before I could see the light, that so many stars could now be gone, that the sun one day as well would be, that this wasn't the kind of thing to overthink. And if I never learned to overthink, if I could switch thoughts off before they started to spin. Take that first celebrity suicide, I mean the first one in our lives. He wrote a note, then shot himself. We weren't supposed to hear this. They were whispering so we wouldn't. It was our mother and a neighbor from down the street. We called her aunt, but she wasn't our aunt. She was these kids' mother, and we hated her kids. We hated her more. She made our mother act so dumb. She made her drink too much. They were drinking this day a bottle of orange liqueur. The bottom of the bottle was shaped like an orange. It was our fake aunt's bottle she brought over. It was too early to be drinking liquor. Our fake aunt was often drunk in the day. She was divorced, and divorce back then meant something. It meant fucked up kids, and it meant your reputation. It meant our fake aunt fell down drunk on her way home from our house. But that was a different day. That day, she fell over the hose the help had left in a bunch on the lawn. We heard her scream, and it could have been from anything, a scream like that. My brother and I ran outside to see. Our fake aunt was face down in the grass. We didn't want to touch her, so we waited for her to get to her knees, figure it out. Our mother didn't drink in the day unless our fake aunt was at our house. Our mother was weak around other women, and we'd always known she was weak. Now here she was, pretending not to be drunk, pretending an interest in us we knew was just pretend. Then pow, our fake aunt said, and stood and shaped her hand like a gun at her head. What we said. Our mother said nothing. To our fake aunt, she said, the kids. Our mother never once thought before she spoke. She always ruined it all. My brother said, why the gun? Tell me, he said. I said, tell me. There was no reason to keep a secret from us. We knew too much already. There were bigger things than the things they kept a secret. Like all of space, for instance, like all I knew about space, like how spaceships floated in a free fall, how astronauts floated within them, how weightlessness wasn't like floating in water, it wasn't a calming thing, how a single force could push you out of orbit, it could send you to the darkest place because you've never had control, you've always had to pretend it. Now here we all were in a kitchen, pretending. Here we all were, as if nothing. We were about to leave for a party. It was a bowling party for some kid we didn't like. The bowling alley was on the other side. Our father drove us and told us, be good. I wasn't sure if he meant be good at bowling or if he meant be good in some other way. There were holy ways we were never taught but heard about. Certain kids who knew this stuff, kids we would never be. They were kids our mother always called good, but we preferred the asshole kids we hated. This party was full of assholes. My brother bowled, but I sat at the counter. I liked the pizza the bowling alley had. I liked the local guys who served the pizza because they also served me beer. This was because of how I looked. I didn't care what the reason was. I was learning to work with what I had. So I sat there feeling old. I drank beer from a cup meant for soda. There was music I liked coming from the walls and the sounds of all those crashing pins, like the sound of gravity, I thought it seemed insane, like how a crush makes you think or just drinking does. But I didn't care then there were things in space that couldn't move out of our way. I didn't care then what asteroids struck us, what black holes sucked us closer to its edge. Pretty soon the other kids were at the counter. They were talking the shit kids always talked, all of them going on and on. That first celebrity suicide. They said he'd shot himself in the head. They said it happened in a kitchen. So then I was seeing our kitchen table. Then I was seeing our mother and the bottle shaped like an orange. Then I was seeing our dumb fake aunt, her hand like a gun at her head, like she was better than him, which she was not, like she was better than anyone, but she was the absolute worst. There was a night she came by our house with a dog. We were eating dinner and she walked in like she lived there. She held up the dog with one hand and said, "Does anyone want a dog?" My brother and I were like, "We do." We were like, "We want that dog." But our mother said no to getting the dog. She said, "No way were we getting a dog when we couldn't even help around the house." We looked at each other like, what did that even mean? None of us ever helped around the house. We had help to help around the house. Our mother was just pretending again. But our fake aunt was better than this, at this. This dog was the runt of its litter, she said, and it was the only one that wasn't brown. This dog was gray, she said, and it was the only one with longer hair. Her kid, she whispered behind her hand, had kicked it across a room because his parents were divorced is what we thought. Now he was all fucked up. Divorce meant that, and it meant our fake aunt was all dressed up for going out. There was a way one dressed for going out. There was a way one smelled, so obvious, so desperate. Our mother said, I said no. But our father was petting the dog now. He had one arm around our fake aunt's waist. He made sounds into the dog's fur. Don't turn this into a thing. Our fake aunt wasn't the one. We hated her, but she wasn't the one we hated the absolute most. And whether or not we got to keep the dog, it doesn't matter the outcome of that day. That scene in our kitchen doesn't matter, or any scene in our kitchen, or in any kitchen, or in any room, as if rooms could even protect us, as if the sun would never collapse, and we would just go on forever, obeying some law of inertia, a ball rolling straight down the lane, no force coming in to stop it. There was such dumb hope in those laws, such bullshit in those laws, because the ball would eventually hit the pins. It would send them wild across the floor. The pins would eventually hit the walls. A kid would press a small white button. A machine would sweep the pins away. A machine would reset the pins, and the whole fucking thing would start over. That celebrity we loved because he was hot. And by hot, I mean more than looks. The kids were acting like no big deal, but I felt I was being emptied. Then I felt a shadow moving in, like the shadow of something you can't even see, or something you're not supposed to. My brother kept asking questions. He wanted details no one else did. I could see the chewed up pizza on his tongue. I said, close your mouth. He said, what's your problem? I said, close your fucking mouth. What was I even thinking then? It's hard to explain, I guess. Astronauts, again, I guess. Forced travel through unfamiliar space. Nearly everything in it unreachable. Everything in it no better than anything else. Just hydrogen to helium. Just helium to something else. And something else to something else. So what good I learned that day was hot. What good I learned was celebrity. I'd always wanted to have it. I often imagined late at night my entourage, my limousine, my attitude. I often tried to will this future for myself. Though could I even believe in this future? Or could I only believe in the grander one, the destined one, the temporary free fall, the on and on, then off? No wonder the kids shot at their heads, stuck out their tongues, fell to the ground laughing. We were all just so confused. There were times I wanted nothing more than to break free from our orbit. I wanted a force to come in already and upset it. I'd been secretly holding on, I admit, to the hope of this force coming in, not an asteroid force or a black hole force, but the slightest shred of holy, some shred of belief that everything would be revealed, that the world was something conceivable, a linear path directed towards some good. But there would be more celebrity suicides and non-celebrity suicides, and more explosion and more expansion. How could you not overthink it? But the kids got back to bowling. The guy at the counter poured me another beer. I wasn't going to drink this one. I'd already outgrown this moment. I called our mother, said, come get us, but our father came instead. My brother put up a fight out front. He wanted to keep bowling, he said. He was beating the other kids, he said. He was now, my brother, officially the enemy. We were staring each other down across an invisible line. In the car, our father didn't talk. My brother sighed again and again and again. Some old song played on the radio. What was out the car window passed too fast. I couldn't focus on any of it. All those houses whooshing by, and all that grass, and all those trees, all those birds, all those stars. That's it. I'm gonna need, it's actually on my coat. It's that black thing, but don't dump it out. Don't. Thank you. This is our hat. It's from Iowa City. Iowa City Hawkeyes hat. So,
Should I start?
yeah, we're going to ask each other some questions
We'll both
now
answer
and
them.
have a conversation. I can't
like
really
Wheel of
see any of
Fortune.
you.
Oh, can't do that one first.
Why? Was that the picture of the lady?
Yeah.
That's a drawing.
You do not look like an art teacher.
I was a note I wrote to Heidi.
I'm looking for the one about machines.
Well, you could just
Oh,
ask
here.
it.
Talk about the role of machines in your work. Why do you use machines? What does the machine represent?
So this is as if the hat is moderating, and this question is for both of us, actually. Do you want to start? Do you want me to start?
You can start.
I mean, I think for me, and maybe you said some of this before, or said something like it, I didn't know that story was going to be called Machines until I was at the end of this book, probably. I think it may have had another title at some point. In writing, I have 14 sections and 7 titles, so each title belongs to 2 pieces in it. And I was trying to invent high school cliques, new names for high school cliques that were more powerful and fierce than the ones we have, these overused ones maybe, and battling them out to see who would actually win if they all got into a big fight, and then Machines won for me because you can't beat that really. So you kind of can, I guess. I don't know. But for me, there was some kind of implied sort of masculinity to that idea, like to being like the toughest or being, a machine. And to then apply, and I say this in the most like sort of clinging to the biggest stereotypes, and to then attach that word to a book about teenage girls felt very empowering for me. And so the machines that show up, I mean, the one I read, it's just like the bowling machine, which I feel like you're now going to make one, which I would love.
Do bowl.
Of course you do.
Yeah.
But it was some way of owning this thing that I was maybe a little bit afraid of too. This thing I didn't understand. These things I don't understand that you obviously do, but I don't. I can't make anything.
You know what? It's funny because like when I saw the title "Machine" on your book and then read it, I was thinking about machine in a way that maybe I think about it, which is sort of the machine as a general word for like the bigger system, right? Like the bigger system of what controls your body or hormones, and the bigger system like that get references in there that gets referenced like the bigger system of the universe,
Right,
and
right.
stars and gravity, right? And how that much bigger that is than the teenage girl existence. But also, I guess in my work, I think of the machine as a kind of system, and it's sometimes it's a brain and kind of how a kind of visual for how a brain is working or not working or broken or stuck. Sometimes it's like it's the machine that does work. It's the machine that represents oppression in a sense. It's efficient, but it's broken. I guess I sort of play with the idea of it being sort of this masculine, efficient thing, and I also like to make the mechanism visible. The whole black box part of computing now is so, I don't know, it's not as interesting as being able to see the mechanics of it's sort of the Wizard of Oz thing. Is like you get to watch the thing that's making the zoetrope spin, and then at the same time see the illusion, or you see the motors on the girl's legs. There's nothing hiding them, but when you watch them, they take on this other meaning. So I guess machine means a lot of things to me.
I think too, like there's some terror I have of machines in general. We were talking earlier, Heidi and I were talking on the phone before we met to come here, and about I was in a lift earlier today trying to get to yoga, and people just kept crossing in front of the car because they didn't think to look because they were looking at a screen, right? And the driver was just like, oh, these people, and he was like really carrying on about it. because all day that's all he has to watch out for people who are just like wandering out into traffic because they don't think, why would they look up? It's all right there. And I was thinking about that machine too as a sort of like extension now of the human body, that like it's connected to our hand, like we are now that, right? And you were saying you were in the subway and it was the same thing, and that Heidi rebelled and put her phone away, and so she wouldn't look like everybody else, which I totally
I was just
respect.
looking at people looking at the phone.
Right, a whole different thing.
But I mean, it's also interesting, like, to call a book, it's like subversive in a way, to call a book about teenage girls a machine, and also to make a machine female for me. It's still that's still sort of subversive in a way, right?
Yeah,
to make a female machine that's not serving you or anything.
Right. I hadn't thought about how many of those robot things that we can have now have girl names.
Oh yeah, I did not find very few.
My Siri has like I guess it's a guy voice, but I find it incredibly condescending. Like he's British. He's always saying to me like Susan, like he's angry, and I just accept it. But I don't know. I'm trying to work through something.
Yeah, I mean, I think of a machine as like something that processes stuff, processes humans, processes our thoughts, processes emotions.
Well, and writing is, and maybe we need the process one, but your machines, is the colander? It's not a colander, it's a steamer. Yeah. That's like sort of spitting out things or like putting things inside it. I love that you've turned this sort of, domestic object. It is domestic. I don't know why I finger quoted, but then the finger quoting is that I'm thinking female object into this receptacle for just like garbage, or like a lot of garbage. And I think that's like what writing is for me. It's just like pouring it all out in that way. I wish that was the cover of my book, or the author photo actually. Is
my Facebook profile picture.
I'm going to pull out another. Perfect.
What?
What role does humor play in your work, and how do you use it or think about it?
Humor. I guess, I always took myself so seriously, like, for many years. And not until I did those wearable pieces where I thought, okay, I'm going to make, like, this fake ad for myself for a product that I'm never going to sell. And then and more recent, work, like the breaking the back stuff, I mean, just humor is just a way to sort of, like, let go of being taking yourself so serious all the time. But it's also a real... humor, or even like animation in general, I think people's guards are down when something is funny, and that they get access, or they have access to something that they might not if the thing is so serious. And I think you can convey some pretty deep things by having an element of humor in things, because people open up more, I think. And then just humor is fun, right?
Do you know, like, have you been surprised by people's reactions to your work? Like, that you're trying to be funny and people aren't thinking it's so funny, or the reverse? I mean, do you ever think you're trying to be serious and people still...
Yeah, that's usually more the case, where I think I'm being all serious about repetition and labor and behavior and discipline and all this stuff about, a repetitive gesture and stuff. And then people walk up and just start cracking up. And I'm like, that's not funny.
You're like, I'm offended.
But I guess it's funny to you. I mean, I can see why they think certain things are funny. But, that has happened with some work.
I feel like I never go into it wanting. I guess I always want, like, I wish I were, like, a funny writer. Like, especially when you have to give a reading, you want just to read something light and funny and everybody is happy and they love you. And that has never really happened. But then I read the other night at the Franklin Park series, which is fantastic. You should all go to that. I'm just advertised for that. But for some reason, the audience found what I read to be very funny. And I was like, oh no, I'm the fifth of 5 readers, and like everyone has read about like terrible men, and I'm about to read something about a terrible man, and they've had enough of it. And then the people were laughing really hard, and I found it really like, I was just really relieved in a way, and I did not expect it at all, and I'd never read that piece before. So for me, it's always a surprise when people laugh. I think if I set out to be funny, I'm now answering the question, that I would fail. You know?
I don't think I ever start out being funny. I mean, like, when you break your back, it's a really serious, the whole thing was so serious, and, you know, I was just sort of, it came out of a very serious thing and ends up being funny, but I never started out thinking it was going to be funny. I was like trying to crack myself up, really.
Yeah.
I thought I'm a pretty, I don't know, I have a high, it has to be pretty funny for me to laugh at myself. So I thought, well, if I laugh, I think it's pretty funny. But it never starts that way. I don't think I can be funny on cue, right?
Yeah,
it comes
you
from
are an
something
actually
serious.
funny person, like in the world.
Humorous.
She's very
Thank
funny.
you.
But
You're
I'm like amazed by how quickly you could do that work. That right while you're wearing this brace, you're like, I'm just gonna make art now out of this situation. Whereas for me, it's like, oh, this is like so traumatizing. I'm gonna make art about it 25 years later. With literally 25 years.
Yeah, I mean, you know, but I had a lot of time on my hands. Staring at the ceiling. And I couldn't really do anything else, you know.
I mean, I wish we could all be that productive that immediately, you know? Like,
took a
there'd
while.
be so much art in the world. Yeah.
At one point I wrote, like, only 77 more days of this brace, you know, whatever. It took a while.
Do you still have the brace?
Yeah, I don't really, my husband's like, don't throw it away. And I'm like, what the hell am I going to do with this stupid thing? I put it in the backyard, put dirt in it, make a planter out of it or something.
You definitely should do something with it.
Yeah.
Unless it's too painful to look at.
No, it's just like a kind
Hi
of ugly
guys.
object.
Sorry to cut you off,
Yeah.
but we're actually going to move on to a Q&A.
Oh, yeah,
so
go ahead.
My favorite part. We have questions if you guys can't think of it.
If anybody has a
dozens.
question,
Does anybody want to ask something?
Thanks for that. It was good. I liked it.
This is Leslie Tenorio, who was also at Yaddo with us in 2001.
I was 14, so I was a lot younger
we
then.
just said that.
This is a question for both of you. Heidi, when you were up there, you used the word gendered a couple times, and I know gender and gender performance and gender perception is relevant in both your work, like your early work and your continuing to evolve work. Now that the word gender is, or I mean, it has been, of course, it's just kind of blown up. And there's so many ways to discuss it, and it's complicated and it's controversial. I'm wondering how the discussion and the continuing conversation, complicated conversation about gender, is influencing your work now, or if you just don't pay attention to it, or does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a fair question, because in a way, maybe I was being sloppy about using the word gender.
No.
You know, it's like really, it's more, I'm talking about femininity in a more conventional sense, in a way, like as a point of reference. Yeah.
I was in a cafe the other day, and I was with a friend, and there was someone at the table behind us who was talking to somebody, and the word gender came up maybe 85 times. And I was like, I said to my friend, I can never hear that word again, like ever. I just reached capacity on that word. And I don't know what else they were talking about. I just kept hearing gender. And I was like, and so I think I know what you're talking about like the word being like, I'm just hearing it all the time. But I think when I was thinking about it sort of more consciously with my last book, that was the first time I was really sort of like interrogating it in a deeper way. For me, it really just is the performance more than anything. And I feel like I'm just going to continue to write that because it's still a performance no matter what, right? And so we were talking about that in terms of masculinity. earlier tonight, but I feel like too, like, I mean, I do use the word gender, and I wonder if saying, you know, gender performance is just redundant. It's just gender is performance. But I've always thought about it in terms of femininity, and then somebody reviewed my book recently just in terms of the masculinity, right? And how this is a book about masculinity. And I was like, I love that, you know? Like, somebody was like, are you angry about that? And I was like, no, God. I'm like, it actually feels like a green light. Like, I got the green light to now write about, like, dudes from some new perspective or something. Or how I perceive that, you know, or whatever that means. But I mean, I think, like, I don't know how the rest of the world feels, but I know how I feel, that it's still an issue that I think about every day. You know, I get up, like, I put on this dress, and what does that mean? What am I performing for you guys that I didn't perform the other night at the other reading that I did? You know, like, who do we have to be each day? Like, we were putting on our lipstick before this, both of us. And, like, why did we do that? Like, you know, what is behind that? You know, what if we didn't? Like, how would that feel, right?
Yeah, I think like performance is a key word for me with that topic.
It's sort of dressing up, like this role you play, like, over and over. And I mean, do you feel that too? Does it influence? Does it play a part in your work and your Leslie Tenorio?
I'm just sitting here.
Yeah, but I know you're a writer.
I think maybe the question, and I hope it didn't come across like, oh, I'm trying to get you, Heidi.
We'll talk about this afterward.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it's just, I guess, the perception of your work. You know?
Yeah. I like that question.
Anyone else have a question?
Oh God, now I'm nervous. I think both of you give us so much, right? Like, there's so much packed into the work, but there's also so much that you don't give us. I mean, you don't give us faces, you don't give us, you know, the silhouettes or the machine silhouettes. We see the motors, but we don't see a lot, right? And then, like, I mean, I think I kept finding myself in a great way, but frustrated with, like, this girl who doesn't have a name. And, you know, we don't know any of the characters by any of the things other than those kind of archetypes, maybe, is a weird word, but maybe. And even the song that I think the father and the brother were singing, and you never told us what that freaking song was. And I was like, I think I know what that song is, but I don't know what that song is. But, like, how do you decide what you're going to give and what you're going to take away?
I like just enough to get the feeling of their emotion across. I mean, she said something so interesting to me about, like, you just, like, come up with these machines and that's it. And I go, hell no, that's not it at all. But I mean, I think it's, for me, I'm a kind of minimalist, and that's kind of what I love about your writing. It's like, there's just enough, and then I get to imagine the rest. And for me, that's kind of the highest art in a way, like, that I can give you just enough to carry you through a narrative or a mood or an emotion, and let it kind of just, like a rock in the water, sort of just spread out from there. Because I don't know if more details make it better. Maybe that's one answer. But also, I guess I'm kind of a minimalist. I kind of like just enough to get the idea and the emotion across.
I think I also would call myself a minimalist. And people have argued with me about that. You're not a minimalist. You've said that same word 50 times. How is that minimal? But it's like, well, it's just one word, you know? So I don't know. How do we look at this? But I feel the same way.
That's a really nice insight, because that was the exact same reaction I had when I read your work and was thinking about this presentation. Like, oh, wow, we have a similar way of approaching narrative or, you know, ideas and how to
like
represent
a lot
them.
of repetition in both of our work, you know, where it starts to build the story, I think. And I feel like I'm more reliant on that than I am, you know, like names or description of hair color or something, like, you know, that kind of thing. Like, I always remember that, like, all of those things are still words that I have to put in in the piece, and they're not always the best words, like I don't necessarily like want to repeat a name over and over with all its baggage, like through the duration of a story. And so how can I get away with not naming any characters? Well, I guess I have to have fewer characters. So there's 7 girls, are now going to be 1 girl, and that makes it easier. I can just call her the girl. And I just reduce and pare down and take away until I feel I can get away with it, with less. There are a lot of songs that are unnamed. The place is unnamed. The body of water is unnamed. People are like, it's a lake, but I don't know if it's a lake. It's probably an ocean. I'm pretty sure it's an ocean.
Hi, Heidi.
Hi.
I haven't seen you for a few years.
Yeah.
I was very intrigued by what you said about how people watching the legs think they're controlling the legs, but in fact it's the other way around.
Yeah.
And I wondered whether you anticipated that in making the pieces, and then for Susan, whether you have an analogy to that when you think about your readers, or when you're anticipating the effects you want.
I did not anticipate it. It was actually, I rebuilt them a couple years ago, and then it was at the show where I was documenting it, and it was this realization of like, oh my God, these people, they think they're, they really think they're controlling her, and I found it so humorous, and I just sort of went with it. I just sort of like let people think this, and not interfere. But I mean, now that I know that that's a possibility, that sort of makes it something I can maybe use in a future piece. But I did not plan that. There's something about when you make interactive work, like you might have the initial idea of like what you expect the interaction is going to be like and what you assume that somebody's going to be thinking, but then how people use an interactive piece is always different than you expect. So you learn stuff, I think, by just watching how people interact with it. Yeah, I did not have any clue that was
I think the best connection I can make is, I don't really get to see how people interact with my work, and as you know, and so one thing that's happening is people, like my friends, will buy the book and then take a picture of it, and then send me the picture, and it's almost always on their bed. So I now know like all of my friends' sheets, and that's been really interesting. I'm like, why all of you? It's like I know all your sheets. But the best I can do, I think, is have my narrator speak to the reader, and so just to remember that there is someone, maybe some at least imagined reader, who's going to pick this up at some point, who's being addressed. And I don't do it too often, but it does come up. There is a you every now and then that is, maybe God, maybe speaking to the narrator, speaking to herself, and maybe speaking to the person who can pick up the book. And that's about as much interaction as I have. But I want to be confrontational, and so then you have to ask, who are you confronting? and so I try my best to make it kind of a multiple type of directness, I guess. Yeah.
We were both raising our hands at the same time almost, but just as I was listening to you talk, and especially the question before Ellen's, this phrase popped into my head that I felt applied to both of you, which was the loneliness of gesture. And I just wanted to run the idea by you and see what you think. What I was struck by in both of your works is you've got these machines, people, whatever, making these gestures. And of course, Heidi, it's very obvious they really are machines, and they have a very limited range of things that they can do. But Susan, in your work, there's a sense in which people are making these gestures, saying and doing these things that maybe they don't actually care about, or they don't understand, or they're not in control of. And in both cases, I feel this real sense of loneliness in the void in both of you. And Susan, you were playing with that with your you know,
Sort
the
of
other.
sad, Stephen.
Yeah, but it's really interesting to me. And again, I'm just sort of wondering: is that something that you either of you thought about, or is that, or am I just crazy?
No, I think that's
No,
a
I
real
can
thing.
see how you can read it that way. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's this, like, a lot of times when I'm thinking about, like, the machine as a mind, it's sort of like I am thinking about a singular person kind of inside their head, and that is a kind of lonely, like, vision in a way, right? Sort of, so, yeah, it depends on the works, I guess, but, yeah, they're kind of singular performances that are kind of a lot of my work, like one person or one machine is kind of performing for the audience. So it is kind of like like a stand-up comedian, or that kind of like tightrope performance where you're on your own in front of the viewers or in front of the camera or whatever.
I think that going back to what you were saying about like the machine of, the universe, like the whole, like the grander sort of machine. I mean, I think about that a lot, and that could be a very lonely way of thinking. But for me, it's really kind of comforting. And so I think I think more of like, I don't think of loneliness as much as like maybe solitude and like aloneness, that I really want to work through the idea of insignificance, which I think is actually a very freeing feeling. That to sort of place these girls in the context of that larger machine, and with all their gender and issues that come with that. And I don't know, I think that's maybe sort of that kind of the performance that goes on there, is maybe where, I don't know if I'm not articulating this well because I think it's a huge question, is maybe where those gestures come from that you're talking about.
Maybe the loneliness comes from sort of the minimalist approach that I take, right? Where I'm sort of, when I used to make these cinema machines and a long time ago, like they were I thought of each machine as kind of like stuck in its own little pattern of thought, like it's sweeping or it's cleaning or it's learning something, and it wasn't until I did a bigger installations of them and I had multiple ones in like a room this size or something, that they then started talking to each other in an exhibition in a physical kind of way. Like you could take what was going on in one and kind of apply it and have a conversation what was going on in another one. And so they're kind of like soloists, but then still talking to each other. So maybe it's kind of, if you see them on their own, they seem very lonely. But then when you see them together in a room or something, they become conversant in a way.
I think too, like just going back to what was the original line that you said?
Loneliness.
Of gesture. I think there's something about like the sort of repetitive motion of your objects, that they're not getting anywhere, really. Right. It's just like, this gesture is going to repeat, forever. That is, I'm glad I had time to think about this, is exactly what I think I'm doing in this book, that just watching characters make the same mistakes over and over again, or just put themselves through the same situation repeatedly, and even with knowledge, knowing this is not getting you anywhere, just to see if, it advances the story, the story even the slightest bit, or if it's slightly different this time. But I think that's probably, how our work connects in that way anyway. And then against the larger universe, this tiny object trying to clean one spot is pretty lonely, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. Isolated.
We got a thumbs up from the back. Does that mean we're done?
Okay. Thank you.